The impeachment trial against Attorney General Ken Paxton is on the horizon, and motions are beginning to pile up. We'll explain what those mean. Plus, in Harris County, Texas's largest county, we've got a lawsuit alleging improper procedures that may have affected the election. I'm Brandon Waltons. This is The Headline. We are just weeks away from the Senate's trial in the impeachment case against Attorney General Ken Paxton. But already we've seen plenty of action, as particularly Paxton's legal team has filed a number of motions, asking in some cases for articles of impeachment to be thrown out, asking for more clarity in others. Here to dissect what this really means and what this is going to look like once the trial finally begins, we have attorney Tony McDonald. Tony, the team for Paxton has filed a considerable amount of motions over the last several weeks. And I want to start with the ones, first of all, the ones that have gotten the most attention, which are, there are motions filed in this impeachment case that say essentially all these, these articles need to be thrown out entirely. What does that look like? What are the odds of those getting through?
Well, so the team is doing, what they would do as lawyers here, addressing, what is an incredibly sloppy impeachment effort. I think at its core, the House rushed through this. They rushed through the charges. They violated a lot of historic procedure, a lot of expected procedure that you would expect. And that's opened up windows for Paxton's legal team to point out, hey, these are flaws in what's been presented to the Senate. You have to remember, while this is a political process with politicians acting in it, it's also this quasi-criminal process. We pull all these elements of criminal procedure in. And so if you start saying, hey, we're going to follow the procedures that are provided for criminal defendants out there, there's a ton of motions that are available that would be available to you or me if we were at a criminal trial. If we were charged with an indictment that looked like the Ken Paxton impeachment articles, our lawyers would be able to say, hey, we're going to put forward motions. Some of those motions are global. They say, hey, here's problems that start from start to finish. Here's a problem that kind of permeates the entire document. And then some of those motions come in and they target specific items in there. So I went through all of those motions to look at them. I think all of the motions, in my opinion, quite legitimate arguments. Some of these questions a bit unprecedented because this is, an unprecedented situation, right? But some of these are incredibly strong. I mean, you're really talking literally attacking some of these articles because they're just not worded the right way. They literally use the wrong terminology. They're missing elements of an offense. So you allege bribery, but you don't actually allege any of the acts required to make up the act of bribery, those kinds of things. And so if this were a criminal case, I think some of these motions to me are staring at me and I'm saying, these look really strong. And they look very legitimate. They very well may be granted.
One of them, too, that I think we have talked about since this whole impeachment began on that rushed Memorial Day hearing in the Texas House, where more Democrats than Republicans voted for this impeachment, that all of it was predicated on this investigations, quote unquote investigation, where the House Investigating Committee hired investigators who talked to witnesses who were not sworn. They were not sworn in witnesses on their oaths, and they were then telling the investigators, who then told the committee members. And so as Paxton's lawyers have called this, kind of hearsay upon hearsay upon hearsay. And that's the basis of at least one of these motions as well.
Yeah, that's one of the global motions comes in and says, hey, look, the state law says a general investigating committee has to swear witnesses in, right? And so we know that the committee violated the law whenever they didn't swear the witnesses in. And that's clear. So what are the consequences of that? And one of the consequences could be, and this is what Paxton's team is totally, of course they would ask for this, they would say, hey, all that evidence that you collected illegally with unsworn witnesses, that should be thrown out. And this is something that you would ask a trial court to do in a criminal trial, and it might be granted, it might not, I don't know, but this is being presented as a global question. Well, if that happens, well, what evidence do they even have? There's actually other motions, though, then that just point out, hey, you just don't have evidence to support the claims that you have here. Your claims are incredibly vague. They're incredibly generic. Or, for example, there's a no evidence motion for summary judgment. Hey, show me some evidence for each of these elements of the things that you're claiming. Define what the elements are. I mean, it's the criminal procedure 101 applied to what is here, something that is just, again, for somebody who is knowledgeable of criminal procedure, knowledgeable even of civil procedure, just any kind of judicial procedure. You look at this document, you say, this stuff is just vague and sloppy and generic and kind of name-calling, essentially.
What about, there's been a bit of attention on the fact that most of these, I think maybe 19 of the 20 charges, are based on allegations or incidents that happened before the last election. Paxton's lawyers have argued that there's sort of a doctrine that prohibits those sorts of older allegations from being included.
Indeed.
Is that, you think that holds weight?
Sure. So indeed, there's the prior term doctrine. So to the extent that the Senate accepts the prior term doctrine, and this is something that's been in Texas law for, over a century, the prior term doctrine says anything that happened prior to the current term that the voters were aware of, and again, all of these allegations, nearly all of them, 19 of the 20 allegations in the indictment, or excuse me, in the impeachment articles, were things that were talked about during the primary and general elections that voters said, maybe whatever, but we like what he's doing in office, we're going to keep him, right? Those things were weighed on by the voters, right? And so a prior term doctrine would say, throw those things out. So there is a motion here that would say, hey, throw out 19 of the 20 articles of impeachment. Now, obviously, you then would have to deal with the 20th, and they have arguments on that one as well. But, it would throw all of those out. So all these things are motions that will go to the Senate and really could prevent there actually being a trial or much of a trial, on the impeachment.
Well, and that's sort of the last question I want to ask is we're expecting to have this trial last 2 or 3 weeks in September, starts September 5th. But when they meet on September 5th, they're going to have this stack of motions. And the question is, who ultimately decides on this?
Well, ultimately, it's going to be the lieutenant governor on some and the Senate on others, the senators. The Senate committee is going to review all of the motions, make recommendations to the rest of the senators. And then at the beginning of the trial, the expectation is for the motions, the evidentiary type motions that wouldn't result in the throwing out of an article, the lieutenant governor would rule kind of like a judge on those motions. And then those motions that would say, hey, throw out Article 5 because it's faulty. Throw out Articles 1 through 10 because there's no evidence or that sort of thing. Those motions would be ruled on by majority vote of the Senate. And so the senators themselves would vote on it. Both the lieutenant governor and senator can defer some of those motions to the end of the trial. So there's no guarantee that you're going to get votes on these things. But you very well could see huge swaths or even the entire set of articles of impeachment thrown out before the trial even begins.
I know there's going to be a lot of eyes. September 5th, day after Labor Day,
right?
Is when they start. So we'll be watching that. Tony, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do Democrats control the Texas House? That's the question I'm asking myself because so many people have been coming up to me and asserting that as a fact. I can count. There are more Republicans in the Texas House than Democrats. But what folks keep pointing to is a Speaker of the Texas House who seems more concerned with appeasing the Democrats than delivering for his Republican voters.
As Democrats, thank you. We appreciate so much your allowing us the opportunity to work together.
You only need 8 or 10 rhinos to side with all the Democrats, then all the conservative Republicans are shoved outside in the wilderness.
Call a spade, the Democrats control the House.
So I'm going to go out and travel the state. I'm going to visit with folks and ask that question. Who runs the Texas House?
So that's a really good question.
Ever since the election in November in Harris County, Texas's largest county, there have been concerns about how that election process played out. Some problems, some irregularities. One of the people challenging that is Alex Mealer, who was a candidate for Harris County judge, who has a lawsuit against some of the irregularities we've seen. Here we have Alex joining us. Alexandra, thank you so much. And first of all, for people who haven't paid attention to this issue, who maybe don't know, maybe don't live in Harris County, they didn't see what happened. What were the problems that people saw back in the November election across the county there?
I don't know if we have a full time account to go through all the problems, but no, unfortunately, they're very widespread. Numerous locations opened late. We also had locations close early, so there were so many problems. Actually, a lot of Democrat activist groups got polling locations extended an extra hour. Unfortunately, because a lot of the Republican polling locations were short of ballot paper, they couldn't stay open. So you had this mismatch of some polling locations staying open an extra hours, others not. And then pretty much every host of chain of custody sort of controls that could be violated. But at the end of the day, a lot of people who should have been able to rely on the ability to go to a polling location weren't able to go and vote, either because it opened late, which the county actually cited the Astros parade as a reason. So the day before Astros won their World Series. So, you can vote, or I guess we won a World Series. And then, like I said, quite a few just had significant malfunctioning. Our largest polling location, actually in the entire country, in this entire state, at West Gray, it opened with only 2 out of almost 50 machines working. So very similar to this kind of disorganization, chaos that most people are used to hearing, but more so than just the inability even to physically go and vote from poll closures. What we've seen through this trial is really a complete disregard for the election code. So a lot of the controls and checks that are in place to ensure that you are who you say you are and that only people from this polling location voted, those were really disregarded. And so our lawsuit, what's a little bit different, is we're really making a rule of law argument that, the legislature, they passed a law, SB 1 in 2021, which really was to change the game and address a lot of the problems that happened in Harris County, whether that was in 2020 or during our March primary, which both sides agreed was unacceptable. There was 10,000 ballots that weren't initially included in the count. And so there are these strict controls, and those weren't followed. So, for example, it's supposed to be a PJ, a presiding judge, that transports the ballots. The county went ahead and just decided to pay county employees. That creates a really big problem with chain of custody. Those county employees' jobs are very much dependent on which party's in office. And so just these slew of issues. And so our point is actually that when you disregard the election code, you've actually changed the whole ball game, because the results are presumed valid when you follow the law. There's a lot of checks. Every Texan, if a county follows SB 1, should feel very confident in what happened. But what happens when you have something in Harris County, which I would say just essentially threw the election code out the window, you really have now questioned the validity of the outcome, because I don't think the county at this point can even say how many mail-in ballots. So our official reconciliation doesn't tie. It's off by several thousand. Then you get any of the backup data from the county. That doesn't tie to what they're reported. And this has just been the history of Harris County, where none of their data matches. And so our point is, honey, if you don't know what happened, how are we supposed to have confidence? You don't even know how many locations were closed. And that's the big frustration, is this burden, this is on you, the county, to ensure you follow the rules, and you should know what happened. It's not me, Alex Mealer, private citizen, that should be having to police up you failing to comply with the law. The legislature was the will of the people, and you violated it.
Yes, and so you and several other candidates have filed some different lawsuits against this. What kind of relief? I know these lawsuits are moving through the process, but what's the ultimate goal in these lawsuits?
All of us are asserting that because of the various issues we've talked about, the true results are unknowable. So none of us are seeking a judge to say, you're the rightful winner. We're saying to the courts, you actually have a responsibility to intervene, because the true results are not knowable. And what that would mean is a new election contest. And then the greater significance of our particular case, which we're filing, is also we expect this to go to the Texas Supreme Court for review. We believe that SB 1 changed the game, and it really is a strict construction, meaning that just by Harris County systematically widespread but disregarding the election code, the burden is now on Harris County to show that they followed it. Otherwise, you've done such meaningful systematic violations that the true results aren't knowable. And so the question for review, even regardless of whether the court says we think these issues were big enough to impact my outcome, is we'll be, asking the court to weigh in. What does SB 1 mean? Does it have more teeth that says, actually, counties, you're not free to just keep doing what you feel like when you feel like? You have an obligation to follow the election code, and if you don't, your presumed valid results are not going to be presumed valid. In fact, you've thrown in the validity, and the reason that matters is because there are so many important checks and controls within SB 1, and the county hasn't been following them. And to such extent, Bob Hall, as Senator Hall, the famous statement, let's make audits auditable again. Well, that's kind of what keeps happening with these elections is they don't keep the records they're supposed to do. They don't follow chain of custody. And so it's very hard to understand, the full significance of just how many votes were counted weren't, because they didn't follow any of the rules of the game. So they can't even tell you.
Well,
and I can say one thing very confidently.
Yeah, and certainly if this is happening in Harris County, right? Biggest county in the state, this could have some real impacts on elections across the state.
Absolutely. And that's our hope with this, is that we will get the Supreme Court to review and, take a look. What does SB 1 mean? Because it would put have an impact statewide, that there would be a very real check and limit on some of these counties that have just kind of thrown their hands up in the air and done what they felt like. And that's not how, the separation of powers should be working. The legislature passed very specific procedures that do improve security, and they've been sort of shifting the burden onto the contestants, saying, well, you can't say exactly what happened. And our point is, well, actually, the kind of bigger problem is you don't know what happened. Can you tell me how many mail-in ballots you actually have? Because I'm pretty concerned that you can't. And that's why it also was part of really trying to ask for the state to hurry and try to complete an audit as quickly as possible, because there's not a government official right now that knows what happened in Harris County.
And we're going to be following this closely, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thank you for watching The Headline. If you're checking us out on YouTube, please go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, hit that notification bell so you can be notified every time we have new content for you here at Texas Scorecard. For right now, I'm Brandon Waltons. Have a great weekend.